I had my first brew day on the Spike brew-in-a-bag system. If you'd like to see how it turned out, stick around. Hello everyone and welcome back. Recently I had my very first brew day experience with the Spike brew-in-a-bag system that you see here. If you remember in that previous video, I had just got it, unboxed it, and was going over the components. Well, in this video, I'm going to walk through my first brew day experience with you. It was a cool experience. I had a great time doing it, but being a new product and being a prototype, like I mentioned in the previous video, there were some kinks that had to be worked out still along the way, and I worked my way through them. I had a successful brew day. I took some notes, provided Spike my feedback, and now I have 10 gallons of beer bubbling away, hopefully ready to drink in a few weeks. So about my brew day, I took some notes here because this is a sort of a impromptu video. I didn't have time to do a full length one here because I wanted to get this information out to you as soon as I could because a lot of you want to know more about this system. So I figured I'll do away with some of the formalities and get right into the details and the nuts and bolts of this thing, right? So I decided as my test recipe, I was going to brew a 10-gallon batch, a scaled-up batch of my Larry's Lager. If you recall, about sometime last summer, I did a couple of videos about my pressure fermented lager. I think I called one of them 11-day lager or something like that. And it was a Munich Hell style of beer. And I wanted to brew something in the larger batch that I had brewed before and that I liked and enjoyed. And it's springtime, so I chose a light lager, Munich Hell style, okay? Not really part of this video per se. I didn't film the details of that recipe, but I could post it down below in the description for you. And again, as I go along here, just keep in mind this is a prototype system. There's bound to be issues, certain uncertainties, things that are odd, different, whatever, right? I'll walk through those as I go through in detail here. So when I set this thing up, I had an issue right out of the box, kind of, right? The Spike brewing system comes with some disconnects that are meant to be used for their style systems, which are fine disconnects, but as you all know, I'm a cam lock guy. I use cam locks on everything in my brew house here, from my pumps to my chillers to every hose and connection. All right, so I had to finagle some way of doing it, and I came up with a impromptu hybrid hose system that got me through brew day. Going to make some changes on it for the next brew. So I had to change my hoses, my connections on my counterflow chiller. Yes, I'm using a counterflow chiller in this video. Electric brewing with the element on the inside prevents the use of an immersion chiller. So I had to go to the counterflow side of the home brewing world, right? And go back to using a counterflow chiller, which is all right for this, for using this system here. So I came up with a system that supported both my pump, because when the system comes out, it's going to come with either as an accessory or an option or part of a package, depending on the price and which package that you buy. It'll come with a pump and optionally a chiller. The prototype came without neither one, so that was my dilemma, and my dilemma alone. You will not have that same experience unless you do what I did and just buy the equipment and use your own pumps and chillers. So once I had everything kind of rejiggled or rejiggered, I went ahead and hooked up the hoses, added the water, turned on the element, and set the desired temperature on the controller. Turned on the pump to circulate the water and put on the lid to heat it up quicker. And this is when I encountered my first issue. I had followed their unfinished user guide to the letter until I realized there was some issues with the user guide that I sent them some feedback on. Hopefully that will be corrected going forward. But basically it revolved around what, for everyone who brews, right? You guys know the term grist ratio. They recommended a grist ratio of 1.25 quart per pound of grain, water to grain ratio, for those who don't know what that means, right? And so that's what you do when you mash in or dough in or whatever, right? Well, this is a no sparge brew-in-a-bag system, so there's no such thing as a a grist ratio. It's basically you put all the water in and all the grain together in all at one time and be done. Well, I discovered the error of that when I went to go ahead and put my grain in and realized it was really dry and clumpy. And I realized, well, yeah, it's a no sparge system. The instructions must be incorrect. I went ahead and put all the water in for the total water amount, which is the sum of the strike and what would have been the sparge water. So the entire water volume required for the recipe. Put it in there, stirred it around, and everything was fine after that. Once it was all stirred in, I went ahead and started the recirculation step. So I ran it through my pump and back into the top of the kettle to let it recirculate during the mash. It helps with keeping the temperature steady, and also to recirculate to help clarify the wort as it mashes. And also try to get some more efficiency out of the grains. I used a step mash schedule on this recipe. Why? Why not? I could do it. It's an electric brew system with a control system that lets me dial in these things really well. With my single infusion mash cooler system, much more difficult to do. I don't do multi-step mashes. Most beers don't require them. But since I had the ability to play with the controller and I wanted to do that as part of this brew recipe, I chose a step mash schedule where I did, let's see what I do here. I did 145 degree for 45 minutes and 158 degrees for 15 minutes. Just a two-step mash schedule, nothing big, but it went pretty well. Just adjust the values and wait it out. And it heated up pretty quickly too. In fact, as far as the heating goes, it was actually, I mean, this is very powerful. This 240 volt, 30 amp system blows away my old puny little Grainfather 120 volt 15 amp system, right? I mean, this thing, I mean, in contrast, for those who want to know the comparison, the Grainfather was, what took almost an hour to get heated up, right? For a 5-gallon batch of beer. This is a 10-gallon batch. It's really more like 16 gallons when you start or so, depending on what your recipe is and your losses. And that heated up that water to a boil in less than a half hour. I think it happened so fast. I actually had a timer going and I overshot the timer. I didn't even notice it was boiling. And so it was somewhere between 3 and 4 degrees Fahrenheit per hour. Between 3 and 4 degrees Fahrenheit per minute. And that was actually very impressive. I totally understand why the electric brewing fanboys are all about 240 now. I mean, I get it. When the mash was all done, it was time to lift the basket and let it drain. And lifting this thing, I mean, quite frankly, is not an easy task. It is a big basket with a lot of wet grain and a wort still inside of the thing when you first start to pick it up. So when you pick this thing up, I did it single-handedly. Now I'm 6'3", kind of a larger frame guy. It wasn't too much of a problem, but if you're shorter and can't lift up over your head this much weight, or if you have some way to step stool or something, or a buddy, which I was unfortunately lacking during this brew day, Chad. Just kidding, Chad. He was too busy to come. He had other things going on. Or do what I just also did for my next brew. I ordered a Hoist System, which is just a hunting hoist system for, I think, 20, 30 bucks somewhere online. A little pulley system that will hang from the ceiling that I can pull the basket out single-handedly and not risk pulling a back muscle. But that's to be expected. It's just the size of batch that you're dealing with here, and just be aware of that. If you're a smaller person or a weaker upper body strength or whatever, just so you know. So as it was draining, I decided to Vorloff it for a while. So I hooked up the pump back into the recirculating port, and as it was dripping and draining, I went ahead and recirculated some wort through there to clarify it further and to try to get some more efficiency out of this system. Because brew in the bag is not the most, it's probably one of the most least efficient ways to extract your sugars out of your grains, right? So every little bit helps here. And just to let you know, for those who are asking, my mash efficiency actually was 74%, which is in line with what I do with my single cooler system. So that was pretty impressive. I actually was thinking it might be less, but talking with Spike Brewing, they said that in their test runs, they regularly or averaged about 75% extract efficiency when they were mashing. So I was 1% down on my first brew day. It was, I mean, I think that's pretty good. While it was still draining into the kettle, I thought I'd speed up my brew day by setting my controller to boil mode. Now to do that, you gotta change it from an auto mode to a manual mode on the controller, which is really easy to do. and you ramp it up to 100% power and get it to a boil. And again, like I said, 3 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit per minute. That's a pretty good clip there. So it got to a boil in no time. I don't even remember how long it took. 10 minutes, maybe 10, 15 minutes. I'm not even sure now. To me, it was super fast though. And while it was heating up, I removed the basket, got it to a boil. It went through the regular boil routine, adding hops, some yeast nutrient, World Flock tablets and things like that along the way. Now I had to fiddle with the power controller a little bit to get the boil that I want. I mean, this boil was so rapid. I knew it was going to blow away my predicted or estimated boil off rate on my brewing spreadsheet. On my other Spike 20-gallon kettle that I use on my propane system, it's got about a 4 quart or 1 gallon per hour boil off rate that I like to use. I turn down the heat and get a nice soft boil going. There's no point in boiling harder than that anyway, right? And wasting all that gas. So I use that same estimate here on here, and I was going to blow that away by a factor if I left it on 100%. So I dialed it back. I tweaked it up and down until I got the kind of boil I wanted, and that was roughly in the mid 60% range, around 66% it seemed to be my sweet spot. But by the time I realized all of this and the boil was over, I'd already evaporated more than the gallon per hour rate. It was more like almost 6 quarts per hour, and that was dialing it back. So just to let you know, that's one reason why my recipe was off. The numbers for my gravity and volume a little bit because of that. So the next time I brew, hopefully I'll get it dialed in. As with any new brew system, right, it'll take a few attempts to get at this, to get yourself familiar with how it behaves and to know what your losses are. So when you write up your next recipe, you can put them in your spreadsheet or your brewing software and converge on your numbers, basically, right? One issue I had with the boil though, which I'm still waiting for an answer from, and I can probably figure this out on my own if I found some time here after this video, but when it got up to a boil, even a very rapid boil, the temperature controller was only reporting a temperature of 206 degrees. Now I'm in the Chicagoland area here in the Midwest, right? And at my elevation, which is about 700 feet above sea level, water boils at 210.6 degrees, or give or take, right? Well, this thing was only reporting 206, so obviously it was off, which made me question in hindsight if my mash temperatures were on the mark too. So I'm gonna keep an eye out for that. I'm gonna probably run some tests on this thing with just some plain water after this video and before my next brew day to see if I can use my thermopen or some other methods to check the temperature that the probe's reading and see if I can actually figure out what that difference is on the lower end and on the higher end, and see if there's a way within the PID controller to calibrate or to adjust or offset that temperature accordingly. But right now, I'm not sure of one. I did download the manual for the PID controller off the internet, of course, right? So it's a lot of fine print. So that's gonna take some time to get through. One thing I must say about electric brewing though, because I mean, I've brewed on the Grainfather, all right, and for 5-gallon batches, right? But when I wanted a 10-gallon batch, I would use my propane system and my Spike kettle there, right? And honestly, it was really nice to know that I can just kick back and on a 10-gallon batch, on the larger batches, to kick back and knowing that the boil will continue and not run out of propane, which has happened before and is a real bummer. I always keep an extra tank around, but still, if you're not paying attention, the boil dies down, you gotta replace the tank and get that back up to a boil again, and you waste precious time doing that. With this thing, unless the power goes out, which can happen, didn't have that problem. I thought that was awesome. Now down to the last 15 minutes of the boil, it was time to do what I like to do, and a lot of you also like to do too, is to sanitize your chiller. Immersion chiller, you would immerse into the boiling wort for 15 minutes with the heat to sanitize your chiller. Can't use an immersion chiller because of the heating element down here. So I had to resort to my X-Chillerator counterflow wort chiller, which you see in the video here. Hopefully I'm showing some overlays of it, but it's, so I had to use that, but I had to sanitize it, right? So I had to run the hoses through it and back into the kettle the last 15 minutes or so to make that sanitized. And then at the end of the boil, I wanted to run the whirlpool around to form my little tube cone in the middle before I rack off of here. So I put the cables or the hoses back onto the lower ports, and I have my one of the racking arms turned horizontally, so it'll counter rotate the wort in there and let it pile up that tube cone that I wanted to form, right? And then I racked the beer to a couple fermenters, right? I mean, just like I would with any other batch of beer. I think everything came out pretty well, considering this was my first time brewing on a prototype system without or with an incomplete user guide. So I think if this was just given to a newbie, no offense to people who haven't brewed yet, who are curious, but you might have gotten hung up here. So I did provide and exchange information with Spike about what I thought about that, and they forwarded it on to their engineers and anyone else that needed to know this information. Hopefully the user guide will be more clear and concise for you less experienced brewers. But if you're a well-experienced brewer, you'll catch on. This is just like any other brew system, right? You know the process, you know the routine. It's just another device, and it's a brew-in-a-bag system. If you've ever done brew-in-a-bag before, it's second nature to you. Now going forward, before my next brew day, I am going to make some adjustments here in order to make to smooth out the kinks that I had here in this last brew day. Right, I think I mentioned before, I'm going to reconfigure my hoses a little differently. I've actually already done that, right before I did this video last night. So I won't have a problem with hoses and moving things around. All my hoses now are hybrid. They have female cam locks on one end and the quick disconnects that came with the Spike system on the other. So my pump will stay cam lock. I had to change my counterflow chiller a little bit, but I'm only going to use that with this system since I use my immersion chillers for my propane system. So that's not a problem. Another thing I mentioned earlier is that I'm going to get a ceiling hoist so I can lift this thing up and down. However, you see in the videos, I have this thing brewed off to the side over here close to the wall where my power outlet that I installed is, behind the circuit breaker down here, behind this little chest here. And the cord was a little short for my needs. Now, the cord's probably plenty long for anyone who's going to be brewing along the wall. Me, I want to push my kettle out more into the center of my garage like I normally do when I brew. And also because I want to install my ceiling hoist in an open spot in the ceiling. I got lights, garage door openers, heaters, light fixtures and things in the way. So I got a longer cable. I bought a 10-foot cable, dryer cable, an extension cable from Amazon, basically. I could put the link to this in the description down below if you're curious. And of course, between that and the hoist and my hose reconfigurations, I think I got a winner here. I think my next brew day is going to be much better. I'm looking forward to doing it as soon as I can. And when I do that, I'm going to do a better video, a more detailed video, and a hopefully more enjoyable video. All right. So there you go. That's my first brew day experience. I hope you liked seeing what I have to share with you guys here today. And if you're a new viewer and not yet subscribed, please consider subscribing. I do lots of videos, and make sure you ring the bell to get notified of future videos, including the next one about this system. All right. So to everyone out there, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.